creative evolution is a difficult subject. Difficult subject because probably the entrenchment of people into Darwinism is very heavy. But is Darwinism really all that established theory? This is the question that one has to ask. The other question that one has to ask, that if you can accept the idea of self-aware universe, consciousness is the ground of all being, then it is to be expected that if we evolve, if evolution is true, then how can evolution not have a mark of consciousness? Would consciousness be so indifferent, benign, that it will create the world? That's the subtitle of my book, Self-Aware Universe, How Consciousness Creates the Material Order. How could consciousness be creator of the material order and then have nothing to say in the creation of the living order? So if one looks carefully on the subject of consciousness, then it would be quite plausible to think that the world is made by consciousness, world is made of consciousness, and world will be made for consciousness. So the major part of the world that is for consciousness is the world of the living, because that's where we find conscious expressions of stuff which we as conscious beings find important, right? But the first thing we examine is that, okay, is Darwinism really a theory that agrees with experimental data? And if it doesn't agree with experimental data, what doesn't it agree with? What Darwinism says is that there are variations in the hereditary material of living creatures. And this is a very good idea. Variations are produced by natural phenomena such as mutation. Later on, we found that even sexual reproduction will combine the genetic material, the hereditary material of two people, and produce variations in the genetic material, the hereditary material. So this idea that Darwin had was extremely good. And then he says that the environment has been changing for all these billions of years, and sometimes quite violently, geological catastrophes. So it is absolutely incredible that organisms will get by without changing. This is the whole idea of evolution. And he was right on. And he said that, okay, so these variations, those variations which is best suitable for the organism to survive, survival necessity is what is the crucial point. And nature then selects among those variations which will be needed by the organism to survive these changes in nature brought about by environment. So we have variation and then selection, natural selection. And the crucial point is survival. It's a survival necessity. So nowhere here we are mentioning anything that is not material, except, of course, there is this very sneaky word, survival, has come in, and that, of course, is a bit peculiar to use for non-alive objects. But now think about organs. An organ like the eye literally takes thousands upon thousands of mutations. Literally. You're already seeing the problem, I'm sure, because here is natural selection. You have to believe that these thousands upon thousands of beneficial mutations, one after the other, have collected. But why is nature selecting them? Is 1,000th of an eye any good for doing anything? 1,000th of an eye obviously cannot see. Right? Now, Darwinians, here is where these belief and storylines come in. Darwinians in their book, they will write about this thing and they will say that, yeah, but what prevents some mutations to be useful for some other purpose? Suppose mutations happen and not for seeing, but for some other reason that nature chooses them. And end of story. They don't elaborate it. But start elaborating it. So there is one mutation, there is one purpose. Another mutation, there is another survival necessity that is satisfied. Another mutation. So you have to come up with thousands upon thousands of scenarios which enables nature to preserve these mutations and not throw them away, not reject them because they have no utilization, because only if they have survival necessity, only then nature will select them. See the problem? The storyline becomes unbelievable. But you'll never catch it if you read a biologist's sympathetic way of presenting the storyline, which will not give the details. So only if you think about the details, you'll catch that, oh look, this just doesn't sound very plausible. Intelligent design is much more intelligent in this regard. It has also much stupidity too. Much stupidity because intelligent design theorists mainly completely ignored the idea of evolution. They say that evolution is not necessary. They pick on some data. There is this data. In addition to evolutionary data, it turns out there is also much data that shows many organisms never change. You choose the data that you want to choose. They have a prejudice following creationists that God created the world, all biological organisms, all at the same time. And they cannot shake that idea that it has to be, according to them, just as for Darwinists, it has to be chance and necessity. What else is there? For them, it has to be that God created all the organisms all at the same time and they never evolved. So they only look at that data, that fossils don't change, and disregard all this change of fossils and all these lineages. We do see part of the lineage. We do see small changes. And Darwin's theory does work for those small changes, microevolution. Darwin's theory is problematic only when we take these organs. How do these big organs, liver, eyes, muscles, all this, how did they develop? Because they require literally thousands upon thousands of coordinated changes. Somehow they have to be preserved. Nature should not select them away, but nature should, according to Darwin's theory. If it's not beneficial, if it's not serving any survival necessity, then it should be thrown away according to Darwinism. It doesn't happen that way. Somehow they must be preserved. So how can nature do that? Even Darwin was very puzzled. And ever since Darwin, has anybody explained this puzzle? No. The theory that we can build from quantum physics is a different theory from the get-go. What quantum physics says is that objects are not concrete objects. They are possibilities for consciousness to choose from. This is the fundamental thing. We assume because we more or less get accustomed to seeing objects as we are seeing them, and we don't quite realize or we don't quite experience things that way, that we are manifesting these objects by choosing from them. We don't perceive this in our experience. What we perceive is that we are not seeing them. I close my eyes and I open my eyes and I see all of you. It seems very much that I see you outside of me, and it seems very logical since I am always seeing you at the same place. I close my eyes and I open my eyes and you are still there at the same place. Or at least the room is there at the same place. Somebody might walk out of the room, but the room is there, chairs are there, tables are there. So I assume that everything is independent of myself and they are always there. So these objects are things that can be predicted. If this chair has no forces acting on it, it will stay there forever. This is the idea of Newtonian physics. We build ideas that way because it seems that way in the macroscopic part of the world. But when people started looking at submicroscopic world, they found it quite different. If you release an electron at rest over here, let's imagine that there is an electron here, and there is no forces acting on it. What happens? Physicists found strangely that we do not find these electrons sitting where we release them. Instead, we find the electron everywhere in the room, always at one place, but in different experiments, identical experiments, at different places in the whole room. So naturally, the conclusion was reached that the electrons are not like normal objects because we are picking them up at everywhere, not even in the place that we expect. One place, one other place. No, everywhere in the room in different experiments. So it was clear that electrons are objects of possibility, and our looking is what converts them into particles of actuality. And this is why in different experiments we manifest them in different places all over the room. But they are objects in possibility, but the possibility is there that they spread all over the room literally. In possibility, electron can be more than one places at the same time. This is the key. Can be at more than one place at the same time. Okay? And the crucial point is that until I look, until consciousness looks, until consciousness has an experience with them, possibilities remain possibility. They don't manifest. This is the crucial point. We have been thinking of actualities, build upon actualities, build upon actualities, and we have been thinking of biology, biological evolution, or life as just actualities built upon actualities, built upon actualities. This is why paradox of Darwinism, how can an organ ever come about without something like hopeful monster, which, honestly speaking, it does not seem very plausible. Neutral genes, of course, is also not very plausible because it's anti-Darwinian even. How can, if the survival of the fittest is the idea, then how can a gene be neutral? But suppose you think in quantum mechanical way, in quantum way, then what? Then these gene mutations, and they are, when we say gene, we forget a very interesting property of the gene. It's a molecule. Gene is portion of the DNA molecule. It's just an atomic combination. Okay? And all the processes of mutation is happening at that submicroscopic level. It's quantum. It took a physicist to point that out. Walter Althusser was a very great physicist who went into biology, and he wanted to find a theory of heterogeneity, of why biological individuals are different from each other. Because biology is a science. In science we study similarities, homogeneity. A theory is given for an entire class of objects. But in biology, Althusser felt that the differences are the crucial thing. Why is one individual of an organism different from another individual? This was his. Okay, he never made much headway on the problem of heterogeneity, but he came across this wonderful idea that, look, we are in gene mutations, we are not talking about things in the Newtonian vintage. We are talking about quantum changes, which are possibilities. They are quantum processes. Once we think of possibilities, then you notice that possibilities will not manifest until consciousness looks. But how can consciousness look if possibilities are not making up anything? They are not being expressed. How can possible genes be expressed? Possible genes will express only when they can make something which has an expression, namely has a trait to contribute. to the organism. Otherwise, what is the purpose of expressing those genes? They will be making something which the organism has no room for, no need for. It will satisfy no survival necessity or any necessity. So the quantum idea grows that if nature has creativity, where? Only when a whole bunch of changes are ready. Creativity, why? If you have written a poem, if you have ever worked on a piece of art, you will immediately recognize how you do it. You cannot do a piece of art with, okay, I draw a line now, I'm inspired to draw a line, and then later I am inspired to draw another line, and later I'm inspired to draw another line, and hoping that all these lines somehow will add up to something interesting. It's done. There were such artists. I have heard of a painter who indeed poured painting on a canvas and expected that something will come up, and somehow people paid for his painting still. But that's a different story. Normally, if you try to do that, it won't sell, because no meaning comes out of such a thing. So what you really do, you have a total picture. Bit by bit you built it, but not built it in the way that I'm describing. You don't build it by drawing, you don't build it in manifestation. What you do is you build in possibility. This is the key to creativity. Creativity is not just doing, but it's also being. We don't do anything in the meantime. We let the doing create possibilities which then interact with each other and become a possibility object. And when enough possibilities gather together, then somehow we see that, and that's a creative insight. And then we start drawing, and everything falls together. All of a sudden, I'm busily drawing, and everything falls together. Poems are done this way. Scientific theories are done this way. Creativity research shows that indeed doing and being both so much a part of each other. I call creative people as do people. They have all this interchange of they're always using doing and being in alternative ways of spending their time. And that is what produces it. And the quantum theory says, why is it that way? Because possibilities accumulate. Even contradictory possibilities can accumulate if you are not bringing them into manifestation by looking at them in consciousness, in awareness. So suppose that's what happens, and then contradictory possibilities like DNA and protein can simultaneously coexist. In actuality, they are very difficult to make, because it takes protein to make DNA, it takes DNA to make protein. So in actuality, you could never make them. Which one do you make first? The chicken or the egg question. Cannot solve it. But in possibility, it's completely okay. DNA and protein simultaneously existing in possibility, and then when that configuration is ready, it comes together. Darwinism is not a bad theory, considering the fact that he constructed this theory in the year 1857. That was a long time ago, right? Long time ago. At that time, not even genes were known. So he was a great scientist. Nobody is taking any credit away. Just because you have discovered quantum mechanics today, we have not stopped revering Newton. Newton is a great, great physicist to discover what he did at his time. But does that mean that his theory is correct? No, his theory is not correct. So why biologists have so much difficulty in accepting the idea that there are creative quantum leaps in evolution and consciousness is needed to solve them? The reason I submit is entirely political. They are so afraid of these creationists that they think that if Darwin's theory breaks down, then creationists will win the battle, win the war. Battles are being won by evolutionists, but creationists will win the war. And from textbooks, the idea of evolution will disappear. But this kind of theory, from the page 1, I have said that there is no debate about evolution. The debate is entirely about Darwinism. Darwinism is a complete theory. I have said very clearly that creationists are completely wrong about evolution not existing. And any intelligent design theorist, if they think that intelligent design exists without evolution, he or she is kidding himself or herself. Because evolution, the data is quite clear. There is absolutely no doubt in any person's mind who has examined the data that evolution happens. Question is it Darwinian? And the answer is that it isn't, because of fundamentally two reasons. One is that we really cannot explain even the basic what life is and how life originated in this kind of theory. And we can never explain macroevolution using Darwin's kind of argument. On top of it, the data suggests that Darwin's theory doesn't hold. If Darwin's theory held, then we would see the steps of macroevolution. We would see thousands upon thousands of so-called intermediates, not just one or two or three, which Darwinians do produce. But we would have seen thousands upon thousands of fossils filling up the fossil caps. We don't. Without the possibility accumulating and making them correct, it sounds arbitrary and implausible. But when you allow the creative process, then you see clearly that yes, that's the way creativity happens. Things add up, and when they add up, then only we manifest it.